Let's talk about the dashes. A dash is a line. And we put this in our writing for a very particular purpose. But before I introduce the dash, let me tell you how to identify a dash, because there are three types of lines that we can write in our paper. And the first one is called the hyphen. I'm going to talk about that in a few minutes. But a hyphen is a very short little line that we write. And we usually use the hyphen to connect two words together, to make them a unit that has a new meaning. Example, on-site coordinator and high-tech company. I want to put high-tech as one word, on-site as another word, so I use my little hyphen. The second line we call the short dash. The short dash is also called the N dash because it is the length of the letter N, right? From one side of the N to the other. How do we use the N dash? We usually use them to separate dates or page numbers. And here are my examples. Page 1611 to 1676. Or pages. You see here? I'm separating my pages. The last dash that I'm going to spend most of my time today talking about is called the M dash. And the M dash is the length of the letter M, which is longer than the letter N, shorter, right? M dash is what we will be discussing. Let me just mention that on your keyboard, you can type the hyphen. But to get the N dash and the M dash, you must go up into the menu. I know you never go up there. Nobody does, but go up into the menu symbols. If you go up there, and you'll find the whole little, you can select the N dash and the M dash. Idiendi and mafan, I know, but don't just put two hyphens together. There'll be a little space there, and it will look weird. You should need to get the right symbol, the right symbol. Single dashes, one dash by itself. I don't think you should use it in academic writing at all. I'll give you my reasons. We do use single dashes in casual writing, in literature, in novels, to make something dramatic and to make something stand out. I'll give you an example. One task is more important than any other to the junior scholar and will determine whether he receives funding, promotion, and tenure, dash, academic publishing. I really want to emphasize that, so I put in the dash. Again, this is, I believe, too casual for scholarly writing, and that's why we so seldom see a single dash in scholarly writing. It would be better here to replace the dash with a comma or a colon, both of which would be fine. Colon would make it quite dramatic. We would know that it was important. A comma would be normal, but would be correct. In fact, I would prefer the colon here, because comma has so many functions that the colon would make it more special if we did put that in. Here's another example of a single dash that I would replace. The range of activities an academic must participate in compete for his time to write, dash. Such activities are important but should not be allowed to take the place of scholarly writing. I would replace the dash with either a semicolon to connect two ideas or a period and make a new sentence. Single dash, again, too casual for our use here in academic writing. Now, you can use, single dash is fine for casual writing. I don't want you to think that you have to stop using all dashes. Just stop using them in your research. Double dashes you can use. That's all right. And let me give you an example of appropriate use of a double dash. The issues that prevent doctoral students from writing, dash. Most importantly, their lack of familiarity with academic vocabulary, dash, are a serious concern for advising professors. When something is very important, grammatically non-essential, like the comma, grammatically non-essential, but important to your sentence, you can use the dash. Now, obviously, this is most importantly. I want to make it important, so I'm using the double dash to really set it off. Even having said this, double dashes are not very common. If you use maybe one or two in your whole paper, that's probably enough. If you're using dashes every sentence, you're using them too much. They should be a little bit like spice for your soup. A little bit is good, too much, no one can eat it. and people will get tired of it. So again, you can use it for the dramatic purpose. Commas are more common, and parentheses means it's really not important at all. Here's my little review on dashes. Double dashes can be used, especially when you already have many commas and you want to separate something and make it more important. Double dashes are common in some fields. For example, humanities uses dashes a lot. Science never uses them. Social science, sometimes. I suggest you follow your convention for your domain. Look in your journal. If you see a lot of dashes, you're probably okay. If you see no dashes, don't be the first one to try. Just follow what your friends are doing and follow the rules that I'm suggesting. Regardless of your field, double dashes should be used seldom because they draw a lot of attention to themselves. And people will get tired of them if you overuse them. You can use double dashes, but replace the single dashes with colons, commas, or even periods. Don't use a single dash. Let me talk about when to use a hyphen. The AIP, the American Institute of Physics, has this to say. They say, avoid the hyphen when it does not serve a useful purpose. That's a very good suggestion. So let's talk about exactly when we should and should not use a hyphen, and let's understand how where we put the hyphen will affect our meaning. Look at these two examples. 24-hour reactions has a different meaning from 24-hour reactions. You see how putting the hyphen in a different place really does change our meaning because it makes two words into one unit or one idea for our reader, which is why it can be so useful. Basically, hyphens make compound words. And they put two words together that now has a different meaning than the original two words had separately. And here are some examples. One-to-one correspondence. Blue-green. Gain bandwidth. Analog to digital conversion. State-of-the-art. Scholar-poet. We are putting in the hyphen to make those two words have a new single meaning. Most compound adjectives must be hyphenated if they immediately come before our noun. Compound adjective means two adjectives together to describe the same noun. When we put two adjectives together before the noun, most of the time we will hyphenate them. Examples: differential mode current. Differential and mode are both describing current. They're both coming before my noun, thus they must be hyphenated. Well-known fact. Well and known are together, well-known. High frequency, low-pass filter, odd integer terms, steady state voltage, common mode voltage. I'm putting two adjectives together before my noun. Those two adjectives will be hyphenated. Now, let me just say that if I were to write these same adjectives not in front of the noun, they would not be hyphenated. Example, we say open current voltage or short current voltage, but the configuration was an open circuit. You see how if there's not a noun following it, I don't hyphenate, right? I only hyphenate if it comes before my noun. If it comes in another place, no, we will keep them separate. Or first aid kit, but you should give first aid. There's no noun here, so again, I keep them separate. Worst case event, we should consider the worst case. There's no event here, so I don't hyphenate. Or low voltage supply, there was high voltage on the wires, and that was supposed to carry low voltage. Again, low voltage and high voltage do not have supply and system after them, thus no hyphenation. We hyphenate when it precedes our noun, when it comes before our noun, not when they just stand alone. Here's another good rule to remember with hyphens. Every time you see half or a number, it's going to be hyphenated with the word that comes after it. Half-baked, half-life, half-width, half-wide, or 3-electrode, 4-terminal, first order, 2/3, 8-bit. Numbers and half, whenever they come before something else, that's always going to have a little hyphen there between that and the noun. When you have ly, we never have a hyphen. Ly basically means hyphen. It's the same meaning. So we would, intensely colored crystals equals intense colored crystals. We would never say intensely colored crystals. That's like saying hyphen, hyphen. right? It's too much. So here we have some other examples. Highly competent person, fully ionized gas. Obviously, because I have ly, I don't need a hyphen. Ly is my hyphen. I know it's connected to the next word. Here are some examples of errors. We developed a fully automated method. Do we like that? No. Fully automated, no hyphen here. We've got our ly. Or the surgically removed tissue. Do we like that? No. Surgically removed, no hyphen necessary when we have our ly. Other hyphens, other rules for hyphen. Every time we see free, we must hyphenate. Sugar-free, divergence-free, toxin-free. Also, do not hyphenate prefixes. A prefix are letters we stick in front of another word. I'm going to say don't do it, and then I'm going to say except in my next slide, and I'm going to show you a lot of exceptions. I'm sorry. I don't like to do a lot of exceptions. I like to keep it simple, but at the same time, this is one of those rules we have to show you when you should not do it. But most of the time, when you see a prefix, don't hyphenate. And some examples, co-author, don't hyphenate. Nonlinear, don't hyphenate. Metastable, multicolor, semiconductor, infrared, LED. We are sticking these prefixes on, and we are not hyphenating because that's the rule, except, ouch, except any compound word with self, all, ex, and quasi must be hyphenated. Self-extinguishing, all-inclusive, ex-president. These must always have a hyphen. When you see those four, I know you have to remember 4 words that are exceptions, but that's just how it's going to be. We also hyphenate when we're trying to distinguish from homonyms. What is a homonym? A homonym is a word that's spelled the same way but has a different meaning. Example, recover. If we put re and cover together, it means something different than when it's cover again. You know what I mean? The prefix cover again, recover, is different from recover in the hospital, right, after I'm injured. So to make sure that you know I'm not talking about the recover in the hospital, I must put a hyphen here when I'm distinguishing with another word, a homonym. Or another one is resolved. Resolve is a word, right, to solve a problem between people. But to solve again, you would put the hyphen there because you want people to know this is not the resolve I'm talking about. I'm talking about a different one. Or this one, unionized. I never thought about this one until one day I was reading my student's paper and I said, unionized? Unionized what? And he meant unionized. And I realized, wow, that is a good example of a homonym, right? This is where by not putting the hyphen, we would totally misinterpret what the author was trying to say. Another case of when you would put in a prefix is when the last letter of the prefix is the same as the first letter of the next word. Example, anti-intellectual. You see the I here? Anti ends with I, and intellectual begins with I, and we don't like to put those double letters together, thus prefix. Or non-negative. Again, N and then N, we want to separate them. Or semi-independent, I, we want to separate them. Also, when you are repeating a sequence of words and it looks ugly or weird or strange, which is not very descriptive, but let me just show you examples. Non-ionizing, non-oscillary. If I don't put non-isolated, this would be no-oscillary. It would be strange. So in this case, we will hyphenate just because of the strangeness of the term. The last reason that we will put in a hyphen is when we are separating the prefix from a name, a symbol, or a number. And I have an example here. Non-Newtonian physics. Newtonian is a name. Newton, he was a guy, right? So we will put a hyphen between the prefix and his name. Or a number. Pre-1970. Mid-1970. We don't want to put the letters and numbers together. So we will hyphenate when we are sticking both of those together. So don't put a hyphen between a prefix and a word unless it falls under these exceptions, and I've explained why these aren't good. let me briefly talk about nouns as adjectives. Adjectives describe nouns. We know that. And sometimes a noun can also be an adjective. Sometimes we need to change that noun by adding what we call a suffix. Prefix comes before, suffix comes at the end. And many times, let me give you an example of describing a stop sign. If I'm saying a stop sign is large, red, and octagon. Octagon is the shape, right? Large and red are fine. They're the same as adjectives or noun. But octagon, that's not an adjective. I would have to say octagonal, which is a strange word. But I would have to add al to octagon to make it an adjective. Other types of endings that we will add to nouns to make them adjectives are ar, ic, ous, and y. I have some examples. Pole becomes polar, right? Economy becomes economic. We add that. Monumentous. Moment becomes monumentus. We add in the ous. Ease becomes easy. Here are some examples of how we add a little suffix to change the function of that word from a noun into an adjective. So, for example, we don't say organization development. No, we can't say noun, noun. We would say organizational development. We would have to add the correct suffix. We wouldn't say matter concepts. No, we would say material concepts. We would change the end of our noun to now become an adjective. Now, here are some examples of nouns that don't need to be changed. And this is the tricky thing, and this is why we sometimes need to use our friendly dictionary, don't we? To see if we need to change the ending or not. For example, a protein structure. That's correct, isn't it? Even though we don't change protein, it can still be an adjective without changing it. Or a silicon pore. We don't change siliconal pore. It's silicon. And also student athletes. In all three of these cases, we did not change the end of our noun to become an adjective. However, sometimes we do. A structural protein. Here I rewrote it, and I do need to change structure to be different. Or porous silicon. I do have to change pore. Or athletic students. I do have to change athlete. How do you know this? Dictionary. I wish I had some better way, but you're just going to have to look it up if you don't know. You don't want to say it wrong. And if you don't do it correctly, the problem is Microsoft Word spell check won't help you because the noun is correct. They may not know you want to use it as an adjective, so it might not underline in red. So you're going to have to question yourself and look up those words that you believe are questionable. Of course, the longer you are in a domain, the more you will know about your domain, and you'll probably know in time what should be changed and what shouldn't be. Of course, every time we use an adjective to describe a noun, we use the singular form of the noun. For example, we don't say chocolate chips cookie, right? We say chocolate chip cookie. Or students, athletes, no, we say student athletes. It's just one when you're using a noun to describe as an adjective. Except, yeah, I hate the exceptions too, but data and media. We say data analysis, even though data is more than one. And many people forget this. Single data is a datum, right? And a single media is a medium. But because we are so comfortable with data and media instead of datum and medium, we always use it, only in this case, we use the plural, or more than one, to describe our noun. How do we use as, because, and since? As academic writers, we are very concerned about the language that we use. We are especially concerned about our word choice. We want to use words that have a single, strong meaning. We are suspicious and we doubt words that have many meanings because my reader must guess which meaning I'm talking about. We like words that have a precise single meaning. And these three words are very commonly confused because some of their meanings will overlap with each other. And for this reason, we correct this a lot in papers, and style guides, for example, APA, have recently added huge sections only to define this problem because it's such a big problem, not only for non-native speakers, but even native speakers frequently confuse these three words. So I want to go through them with you. First of all, let's talk about because. I love this word, by the way, because of these three words, this one is the most singularly used. Because means because all the time. It's just a very clear word. For the reason that, or the fact that. That's what because means. Very simple, very easy to follow. Let's talk about since. Since has more meanings than because. We like it less. We are more suspicious of since. Since is going to give us more problems. Since can be an adverb, which means from the past time until now. Since can also be a conjunction, which might be in the time past. And since can also mean because. That's the problem. So what does APA say? APA says don't use since to mean because. If you mean because, say because. Otherwise, it could be confusing. APA says since is more precise when it is used to refer only to time, meaning after that. Otherwise, replace with because. Let me give you some examples of why this is a problem. Here's an example sentence. He wanted to be a biologist since he was 6 years old. Is it because he's 6 years old or since the time when he was 6 years old? Do you see the problem here? It could be either. I don't know what you mean. So, according to APA, only use since if you're talking about time. And otherwise, you should use because for cause. Here's another example. I got this from one of my students' papers. The study could not be performed since the equipment malfunctioned. Is it because the equipment malfunctioned or since the time when the equipment malfunctioned? You see the possible double meaning here and thus the unclearness. This is why we would say because if we're talking about cause. If you're talking about time, since is correct, but my student was actually talking about cause. So we changed it here. Let me talk about as with you. As, okay, because has basically one meaning. Since has at least two meanings, and as has 5. So as is really not a useful word for us. It is our very last choice when we are choosing a word. Let me just give you a few of the meanings. I'll give you 3 from the dictionary. As means to the same degree or amount. We can use as to mean that. That's fine. For instance, when considered to a specific form, it can also mean as if. It can mean while and when. It can mean because. Basically, it can mean everything. It can mean like. It can mean capacity, character. So AMA has a new rule about as. They're very concerned. Here's a quote from the American Medical Association. They say, as, because, and since can all be used to mean for the reason that is meant. However, in this construction, as should be avoided when it could be construed to mean while. This is a problem. If it could mean while, use while. Let me give you an example sentence. Here it is. He could not accurately examine the patient as he was looking at another patient's chart. Do I mean while he was looking at another patient's chart or because he was? You see the double meaning here. Very hard to understand, and AMA is also concerned about that, and so you would say because he was working, or you would say while. You would avoid using as for either of these situations. Just do a quick review on these 3 words, since, as, and because. Because we use as and since in various ways, many style guides, I gave you a couple examples, recommend using each word to only have one meaning. Thus, we use since to mean time. We use because to mean cause. And we avoid using as whenever we can. Of course, it has 5 meanings, so we are going to use as a lot. But don't use as to mean cause. Don't use as to mean when or while. Don't use as to mean since. Try to use those other clearer words instead. And your reader and reviewer will certainly appreciate you as well. How do we start a sentence with because? I remember in elementary school, my teacher told me, Steve, don't start your sentence with because. Why did she tell me this? Well, my English teacher was trying to help me avoid making a very common writing error. Often she would ask me a question. She would say, Steve, for example, in academic writing, why do we care about our English? And I would answer, because we don't want to be rejected by the journal editor. And she would say, wrong. That's a sentence fragment. What is a sentence fragment? It means it's not a complete sentence. And she was right. This, in fact, is wrong. It's not a complete sentence. But it's wrong not because it starts with because. It's wrong because it's not a complete sentence. What makes a complete sentence? We need 3 things. First, we must have a subject. Second, we must have a predicate, or let's say action, okay? Third, we must express a complete thought. Now, let's look at my sentence again. Because we don't want to be rejected by a journal editor. It has a subject, it has an action, but it does not have a complete thought. That's our problem with this sentence. So, teachers will make a rule. They say students cannot begin sentences with because, and the whole fragment problem disappears. However, it disappears for the wrong reason. Not because we learned why, but because we just avoided using the word because. The new student says, we don't want to be rejected by the student editor. This is correct. It's a full sentence. A better student says, we care about English because we don't want to be rejected by the student editor. He puts because in the middle of his sentence, and it's a good student, It's correct. However, I want to go back and discuss this rule again with you because, in my opinion, because is just a wonderful word to start sentences. And when we don't use it, we often use a lot of really bad substitutes that are long and redundant. Let's talk about how do we get a sentence fragment or incomplete sentence. Basically, an incomplete sentence occurs when we have a dependent clause used as a sentence. Dependent means depends on something else. And we make our clause or our sentence dependent when we use words like because, when, if, and while, right? These words mean that I'm dependent on some other idea somewhere else in my sentence. So, for example, because I don't like stinky tofu would be a dependent clause. I could say I don't like stinky tofu, but when I add because, it becomes dependent, right? It was independent, but now I put because, and now it's dependent. But if I completed my thought, I would say, because I don't like stinky tofu, comma, I avoid going to night markets, and now I have a complete thought, right? Now I have a complete idea. Or, when students act crazy. When makes my clause dependent. But if I finish my thought, when students act crazy, teachers often take sick days. Now I have a complete thought, right? I have completed my idea. So my suggestion for English teachers, who probably aren't really here today, but rather than telling our students to not use the word because, just tell our students to finish their thoughts. And if they finish their thoughts beginning with a word like because or while or when is fine. So here's my little conversation that might happen. Why do we care about our English student? Because we don't want to be rejected by the journal editor. Teacher says, finish the thought. Because we don't want to be rejected by the journal editor, what? Student says, because we don't want to be rejected by the journal editor, we care about our English. Han Songming, the teacher says. That's right. Let me show you, too, that we can put because in different places in our sentence and it's still correct. I could say, because I avoid going to night markets because I don't like stinky tofu, or because I don't like stinky tofu, I avoid going to night markets. 都可以. Either one is correct. I'm completing my thought. And because is less redundant than these other options that I so commonly cut out of my students' papers. Because they don't want to begin with because, they say, due to the fact that, garbage. Owing to the fact that, on account of, on the grounds that. Not only are they long, they're often very unclear. On the grounds that, what does that mean even exactly? I'm not totally sure. And so they're forced into these long phrases, all of them much worse than that good old word because, which they certainly can use if they just complete their thought, right? It's also clearer than these words. Due to, especially due to, which we should not use to start a sentence, by the way. There is a rule about that. Due to, since, as, being, considering, seeing, since. All of these have double or triple meanings, whereas because just has one meaning. And remember our rule, the more uses we have for the word, the more we hate the word. We like the words with the single clear meaning, like because. We would prefer to start our sentences with one of those. Let me end today by talking briefly about abbreviations, particularly two kinds of abbreviations, initialisms and acronyms. Now, an abbreviation is when I make a word shorter, usually to a couple letters. And I will use those letters instead of my full term in my paper. And the rule is we introduce the abbreviation in parentheses the first time, and then for the rest of the paper, we can use our abbreviation, right, instead of our full term. Here's an example of introducing an abbreviation. However, these two types of abbreviations are different, and they're frequently confused. And so I want to talk about what the difference is between the two of them. Let me begin with what we call initialisms. An initialism is formed when I take the first letter of each word and I say each letter. Example, FAQ is frequently asked questions. IEEE is the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers. AFM, Atomic Force Microscopy. ESL, English as a second language, right? We are saying the letter. The letters are not a new word. We still say the letters. That's the key point with the initialism. I don't say ESL, I say ESL. It's not a new word. I say the letters, thus initialism. Now, acronym is different. I still take the first letter, but now it's a new word. That's the key point. Example, laser. Laser means light amplification by simulated emission of radiation. But actually, we don't say L-A-S-E-R, do we? We say laser. It's a new word now, and it's called an acronym. Or radar, radio detection and ranging. Each letter forms a new word, but that is a phonetically pronounced word, right? I don't say R-A-D-A-R, no, I say radar. Scuba, another example. Self-contained underwater breathing apparatus. Now, the words that I just gave you are so common that we actually write them in lowercase, not uppercase. Most of the time, we will write them in all capital letters, like this one, PIN. PIN is personalized identification number, right, for your ATM machine. Or MET, M-E-T, mobile equipment technology, all capital. But when it becomes very common, like these, we actually say them lowercase. Either way, it's a new word. We're not saying the letters. We're not saying MET. We're saying MET. We're not saying PIN. We're saying PIN. The word itself has changed. Why do we care about this? Because when we pronounce something differently, the grammar will also change when we write about it as well. It will change our pronunciation. And let me give you an example. For example, acronym AIDS or initialism HIV. One is a word and one is an initialism, right? And when I write my paper, we have a rule for using a or an. If it sounds like a consonant, we will use, for example, HIV requires an, because H, you hear the sound? But if I say the term a human immunodeficiency virus, it will change. So I must know whether I pronounce the letters or whether I pronounce it as a word, because that will change whether I use a or an with that initialism or acronym in my paper. Also, let me just mention that if you don't use the term correctly, your reviewer may begin to doubt how professional you are in your domain. He may begin to doubt how familiar you are with those terms. So it's worth looking up at least one time whether it's an initialism or an acronym. Both of them are very common. There's no way to predict which one it is. IS, let me also just say that we don't usually pluralize our abbreviations. We don't say ISs for information system or GM for General Motors for more than one. We just use it as a term, GM or IS. Another thing, another problem that we often have with our acronyms is redundancy. Sometimes I see papers and the student will repeat himself. Here's an example. RIE means radioactive ion etching, right? But he will say RIE etching, but that's like saying etching, etching, right? We are repeating ourselves. Or PIN number, but N is for number, right? So we're saying number, number. Or RAM memory, but random access memory is memory. We know that. So don't repeat the term after an acronym if the term is already in your acronym itself. And your reviewers, again, will know this and expect you to follow this as well. It's okay in casual conversation, but when we're writing formally, we want to use the formal term correctly. Also, sometimes students think that whenever they have a capitalized initialism, that the term must also be capitalized. TQM is capitalized, but actually we write total quality management. We do not capitalize because it is not a proper noun, right? So make sure that just because you capitalize the initialism doesn't necessarily mean that the actual term will need to be capitalized as well. Good tool to use is Google Scholar or Wiki. You can check that in 2 minutes and save yourself some embarrassment during your peer review. How? Well, that's all that I have for you today. Appreciate your coming and spending this time. It was good to talk with you. Every week I post another answer to a question on my blog here, editingblog.tw. You're welcome to look at the conversation. You probably already received the e-newsletter, which is great. That's the same content there. If you need editing or translation, we now have 31 full-time editors and translators here in our Taipei office. And all we do every day is research papers, and only for Taiwan. So we're very professional at decoding the Taiwanese English and getting it published. We've been doing it for 9 years now, and we'd be happy to help you with your paper as well. Thanks for coming, and bye-bye.